The deluge hit the small Boston street like a physical wall. A young woman in a wheelchair, Elena, sat soaked in front of a closed cafe, her hands shaking from the cold and the effort of holding her failing battery. Cars sped past. Drivers, too, hurried to notice, their headlights slicing the gloom. Then a man in a worn brown jacket, holding a single sturdy umbrella, approached her. "You shouldn't be out here in this downpour." Her voice trembled. "No one is coming to pick me up." He lowered the umbrella, fully sheltering her. "Then I suppose I will be the one to pick you up." Her tear-filled eyes met his, unaware this man was the very person who had saved her life years ago. Daniel Hayes was 38 years old, and he carried the weight of a quiet past. A former aeronautical engineer and a decorated staff sergeant in the Army Corps of Engineers, he was now content, or rather resigned, to a simpler life as a maintenance supervisor at the local university. The transition 5 years ago had been less a choice and more a forced retreat after his world shattered. His wife, Sarah, had been killed in a catastrophic roadside accident. Daniel had been minutes away. He had raced there, seeing the smoke rising from the highway. He was close enough to hear the sirens, but too late to pull her from the wreckage. The loss was a permanent, jagged edge in his heart, leaving him alone to raise his daughter, 8-year-old Lily. Lily, with her boundless, untainted faith in the magic of kindness, was the only reason his engine still ran. His existence was a silent penance. He lived by a solitary, internalized rule. When he saw someone in need, he stopped. No questions, no hesitation. Every traffic jam he helped clear, every flat tire he changed, was a futile, desperate attempt to rewrite the one moment he hadn't stopped, the one time he hadn't arrived in time. He often told Lily that every small act of help was just him making sure the universe was kept neatly maintained, a quiet joke that disguised the depth of his devotion to service. It was late Tuesday afternoon when the rain turned from a sprinkle to a heavy, relentless downpour. The city was dissolving into gray noise. Daniel, driving his beat-up pickup truck home from his shift, noticed the small, still figure beneath the awning of an abandoned storefront. A young woman, clearly drenched, slumped in a powered wheelchair. The blue lights on the chair's console were dark. She wore no raincoat, her face was buried in her hands, and the water pooling around her tires suggested she'd been there for a long time. He pulled over immediately, slamming the transmission into park. He grabbed his utility umbrella and sprinted through the rain, his military training instantly overriding his fatigue. "Ma'am, are you all right? You need to get inside." She looked up, her face pale, the tracks of tears indistinguishable from the rainwater streaming down her cheeks. Elena Voss was young, maybe 25, and utterly defeated. "My chair failed," she whispered, her voice fragile, strained from cold. "The battery shorted out, the manual brake is locked, and my attendant, she just walked out, said she couldn't handle the pressure of this job anymore." The sight of her complete vulnerability, the raw, cold despair in her eyes, resonated deep within Daniel's own core of grief. He recognized the look of having been abandoned at the worst possible moment. He didn't hesitate. He took off his thick, warm jacket, the one his wife had gifted him on their last Christmas, and carefully draped it over her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and shocking. Then he held the umbrella firmly above her. "This is no place to wait for anyone. Waiting in the rain is a recipe for heartbreak. I'm taking you home." She tried to object, pulling his jacket tighter but keeping her distance. "I don't know you. You could be anyone." "Then we'll start getting acquainted now," he replied gently, a small, weary smile lifting the corner of his mouth. "My name is Daniel, and I am capable of seeing when someone needs help." He positioned himself behind the wheelchair. It was an extremely heavy, specialized machine, and the manual locks were stiff. He had to engage his core strength, bracing his feet against the slick pavement. He didn't push aggressively. He maneuvered with a slow, disciplined, respectful determination, treating the chair as an extension of her, not just a burden he had to move. He paid attention to every crack, every puddle, every slight incline. His focus was absolute. Finally, they reached a dry patch beneath a larger portico. She was trembling violently, but the fear in her eyes had been replaced by cautious bewilderment and a flicker of deep respect. You went to a lot of trouble, she murmured. You didn't have to do that. Daniel stared out at the rain, his own shirt soaked beneath a thin t-shirt. He didn't look at her when he spoke. The words were not for her ears, but for his own ghost. I once let a person wait in the rain because I chose the wrong route. I didn't turn around when I had the chance, and I lost her forever. He paused, the memory a dull ache. I won't make that mistake again. Not if I can physically stop it. Elena looked up at him, her pale, exhausted features softening. The fear was entirely gone, replaced by a strange, quiet recognition. She didn't know why, but this stranger's immense grief felt safer than any caretaker's pity. He hadn't offered charity. He had offered shared pain and genuine presence. A person passing by, recounting the scene later on social media. The man didn't just push her through the puddles. He actually took his coat off and draped it over her wheels to shield them from the deepest water and debris. It wasn't pity, it was profound respect. He focused on her dignity. I knew right then he was a good man. Daniel found a small independent coffee shop still open on the next block, its neon sign glowing softly. It was quiet, the air thick with the comforting aroma of espresso and damp wool. He helped Elena inside, carefully navigating the small ramp, ensuring the wheels never scraped the doorframe. They settled in a corner booth, steam rising lazily from two oversized mugs of peppermint tea. Daniel rubbed his hands together, trying to coax warmth back into his chilled fingers. He felt utterly exposed in his wet clothes, but strangely calm. What do you do, Daniel? Elena asked, taking a shaky sip of the hot liquid. The warmth was slowly bringing color back to her cheeks. Maintenance supervisor, he replied, looking down at his worn, calloused hands. I keep the lights on and the pipes running at the local university. It's quiet work, necessary work. She studied him, her sharp, intelligent gaze lingering on his face, tracing the deep lines around his eyes. You don't look like a guy who fixes leaky faucets. You look like a man who has lost something priceless, something essential. You have the eyes of a professional soldier, eyes that have seen things they can't unsee. He offered a slight self-deprecating smile. You're perceptive, Elena. I was in the military and then an engineer. I left everything after I lost my wife, Sarah, in an accident back in 2019. She was trapped in the car. I couldn't get there fast enough to save her. The silence that followed was heavy, an acknowledgement of his deepest, darkest failure that needed no further explanation. Elena gently set her mug down. Her eyes drifted toward the window, reflecting the slick, wet streetlights. She spoke softly, her voice barely a breath above the clinking of porcelain. The feeling of helplessness is the worst kind of grief. You survive, and then you're left wondering why and how you can possibly justify it. You understand that feeling? Daniel asked, genuinely surprised by the depth of her insight. Of course. I also had an accident that year, 2019. It was late autumn. My car flipped on a highway overpass. A piece of shrapnel took out the steering column, and I lost control. She paused, taking a slow, shaky breath. I was a paralegal then, ambitious, driving home from a massive case win, and then everything stopped. The diagnosis was T8 paraplegia. It's a complete loss, but I can still move my arms. A second chance, the doctors called it. She looked at him directly, her eyes wide. But someone saved me, she continued, a faint, grateful light shining through her pain. A soldier, actually. He ran straight into the crash site before the paramedics could arrive. It was chaos, spilled fuel, smoke, and shattered glass everywhere. He pulled me out. I was unconscious. I don't remember much, only the sound of his breathing, the rough fabric of his fatigues, and the immense heat of his arm holding me. Daniel froze. His head lifted slowly, his gaze fixed on her. The atmosphere in the corner booth thickened, becoming electric. I only caught a fleeting glimpse as they loaded me into the ambulance, she said, tears gathering again. He was gone moments later. I didn't see his face clearly, but I remember one unique detail, a burn scar, a big old one, right here. She tapped the inside of her left forearm, exactly where her own fingers were resting. Daniel's entire world seemed to tilt. The color drained from his face, leaving the freckles across his nose prominent against the sudden pallor. His breath hitched, a silent, sharp intake of air he instantly regretted. He felt the cold shock of her words traveling up his arm, settling on the physical map of his life. The long, twisted, rope-like scar, a remnant of a blast years before his wife's accident, stretched from his wrist almost to his elbow. He had earned it disarming a faulty explosive device in Afghanistan, a textbook mission, recognized with a Bronze Star. Yet that heroism felt utterly insignificant now, compared to his failure to save Sarah. He instinctively tried to pull his left arm back, but his muscles locked, rooted by the weight of her piercing, hopeful gaze. He forced himself to meet her gaze, his expression unreadable, maintaining the thin facade of a stranger. He didn't move his hand. He was very brave, Elena added, longing in her voice. I've tried to find him. I need to thank him. That moment, his choice to risk everything, separated my life into before and after. He saved my life, but he disappeared the moment the ambulance arrived. I sometimes think he only wanted the saving, not the thanks. Daniel gently moved his left hand, turning his wrist slightly beneath the table. The scar was hidden, but its presence was a burning weight. He chose his words carefully, filtering the shock into an almost stoic calm. Perhaps that person understood what true heroism is. It's not the recognition, it's the quiet act. And perhaps he knew that being remembered might complicate the life he needed to build afterward. But I need closure, Elena insisted, her voice breaking. I need to tell him that because of him, I'm trying to find purpose in the paralysis, that I paid the price of the living by staying strong. Daniel reached out slowly, his fingers hesitating, then lightly covering her hand where it rested on the cool mug. He did not deny the truth. He only said, that person would be proud to see you still fighting. The debt of survival is paid simply by living well, Elena. Don't look backward for the hero. Look forward for the reason. The cafe owner, recalling the strange pair. They sat for hours without speaking much. The man was soaking wet, but he never complained. When he laid his hand over the girl's trembling one, she started weeping silently, as if she had finally found the one person in the world who truly understood her pain. It was more than sympathy, it was communion. It was two broken people recognizing each other. The coffee shop closed its doors, leaving Daniel and Elena alone in the quiet. Daniel offered again to take her home. This time she accepted without hesitation, the barrier between them having dissolved into a shared, unnamed history. As he drove, the rain had become a gentle, mesmerizing mist. Elena watched the streetlight streak across the window. She spoke, her voice filled with a strange, contemplative peace. You know, Daniel, I hated the rain. It was always a reminder of the accident, the loss of control, the sense of being trapped. But tonight it feels different. It feels less like a threat and more like a curtain being drawn over a past I can finally put to rest. Perhaps the rain hasn't changed, Daniel replied, maneuvering the vehicle skillfully. Perhaps the one meeting it has changed. You are not trapped now, Elena. You are moving. He helped her into her immaculate modern apartment building. Her attendant, Mrs. Miller, rushed forward, clearly relieved and flustered. Miss Elena, who is this gentleman? You were out for hours. I was worried sick. Elena looked from the flustered attendant to Daniel, her expression one of profound certainty. He is the only person who didn't leave me sitting out in the rain, she stated simply. Not today, and not 5 years ago. As Daniel turned to leave, sensing the danger of disclosure, Elena's voice rang out, suddenly sharp with conviction. Wait. He stopped, his back to her, rigid. What is it? I know you, she whispered, her eyes searching his profile, trying to pierce the wall he had built. The way you talk about loss, the scar, the way you knew exactly where to touch my hand to calm me. It's not a coincidence, Daniel. It's a connection. It's just coincidence, Elena. I told you. Get warm. He walked away, refusing to be seen as anything other than a passing Samaritan. He desperately needed to protect the anonymity that kept him sane. The next day, Daniel was back at the university, high up on a scissor lift, fixing a flickering auditorium light. An ordinary job for an ordinary man, 80 feet above the ground. He felt safe up there, disconnected. Meanwhile, Elena was consumed. She couldn't let it go. She used her old paralegal contacts, pulling strings and favoring favors. She searched through commendation reports, police files, and internal military records related to the 2019 multi-car pileup. The search was emotionally draining. Every detail she uncovered brought the horror of the event back. She searched not for a hero, but for a man with a distinct burn scar who had vanished from the scene. And there it was, hidden deep within a heavily redacted initial responder report, a line in a commendation draft. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes, Army Corps of Engineers, noted for extraordinary courage in extracting a victim from a burning vehicle moments before secondary explosion. The date matched her accident precisely. The file also detailed the existing burn injury on his left forearm. She burst into tears, the relief and the shocking realization of his immense double sacrifice, then and now, overwhelming her. He had carried her out of the fire, and then yesterday he had carried her out of the rain. She knew instantly why he had hidden the truth, because for a hero, the act is the reward, and the thanks is the complication. She immediately ordered her specialized transport to take her to the university. She found Daniel in the central quad, his yellow lift towering above the ground, his back turned as he adjusted a heavy lamp fixture. She wheeled herself directly beneath him and waited, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When Daniel finally noticed the bright red of her chair in the periphery, his maintenance wrench clattered to the steel floor of the lift. His composure completely shattered. He lowered the lift quickly, the motor whining, his face a mask of sudden, cold panic. He stepped off the platform, looking immediately exhausted and vulnerable. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice raw with emotion, yet firm. "You were saving my life then, 5 years ago. You were saving my dignity yesterday. Why did you hide the truth from me?" He avoided her gaze, focusing on the fallen wrench. "I was doing my job, Elena. Then and now. The mission was completed. You lived. That's all that matters. I didn't want you to look at me through the lens of obligation. I just did what was right. But I owe you everything," she pleaded, tears returning. "My life, my second chance. You gave me the opportunity to live, and you asked for nothing. That is the greatest gift. I had to find you. I need to tell you." He finally looked at her, his eyes full of anguish. "You don't owe me anything, Elena. You truly don't. The cost was paid. I lost my wife that same year. I carried that failure home. Saving you was the only thing that kept me from collapsing entirely. Please, just live well. That is the only payment I would ever accept for having kept you alive." She reached out, grabbing his still damp, trembling hand. She felt the ropey, unmistakable texture of the old scar beneath her fingers. It was the physical proof of his heroism and the root of her redemption. Her voice was firm despite the tears. "You said the debt of survival is paid by living well. But you are not living well, Daniel. You are hiding. So let me have the chance to do what is right. Not for me, but for us. Help me make a difference with the life you saved." A student witnessing the scene. "I saw this beautiful young woman in a wheelchair waiting patiently for the maintenance guy by the clock tower. When he stepped off the lift, his posture crumbled. She didn't say hello. She just said, 'Thank you for not leaving me again.' And then they both just laughed like the rain had suddenly stopped just for them. It was intense. The Rainlight Foundation was established 1 month later. It was Elena's brainchild, born not of pity, but of purpose. The foundation was dedicated to providing immediate, practical support for disabled veterans and their families, ensuring they found genuine opportunity, not just charity, in their transition back to civilian life. Daniel initially refused any formal role. "I'm a man with a wrench, Elena. I don't belong in a position of honor. My place is with the working people, with my tools and my daughter." Elena had anticipated this. She brought Lily to the university quad and introduced her to Daniel. Lily, who had only heard about the magic of kindness her father possessed, was instantly captivated by Elena's purposeful energy. "Daddy," Lily said, holding Elena's hand, "Elena needs the magic to work big. You have to help her." Daniel looked at his daughter, his heart melting. He couldn't refuse the logic of the 8-year-old who saw the world in terms of pure goodness. I don't need a figurehead for honor, Elena countered, her resolve matching his stoicism. I need a real person helping real people. I need the perspective of the man who knows what it's like to be broken and rebuilt, who understands the practical needs of service members and how to fix things. You're not the face of charity, Daniel. You are the CEO of operations. You're the light. She compromised, giving him the title Director of Veteran Logistics. His first project was to secure and modify specialized transport vehicles for veterans who needed accessible transit for work, solving the very problem she had faced in the rain. During the inaugural press conference, Elena spoke with an emotional intensity that captivated the room. The logo, a single bright light shining through stylized raindrops, was subtle and powerful. 5 years ago, I was saved by a hero who disappeared, she began, her voice strong and clear. Yesterday, I found him again, hiding his greatness because his own pain told him he wasn't worthy of praise. He taught me that the debt of life isn't paid in money or thanks. It is paid by using that life to serve others. She paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. My hero, she announced, her voice rising as she gestured toward Daniel, who was sitting humbly in the front row, looking intensely uncomfortable, does not stand on a stage for recognition. He just carries a wrench, a permanent scar, and a heart that never stops saving people. She concluded, he is the living proof that even the most tragic rain can bring about the brightest light. The audience immediately rose to their feet in thunderous applause. After the standing ovation subsided, Daniel made his way to her. The distance, the social gap between the CEO and the maintenance man, had fully collapsed. Thank you, he murmured, the words catching in his throat. Thank you for making me see that the rain can be beautiful too. Lily says the magic is working. No, she corrected, gently placing her hand over his again, their shared scar history a silent bond. It was you who made it beautiful. Now let's go fix something else. From this day forward, I choose to look at people a beat longer. I will live kindly. A year later, the Rainlight Foundation was thriving, having helped dozens of veterans find new careers in adapted housing. Daniel and Elena organized their annual Renewal Day at a large rehabilitation hospital, a celebration of mobility, independence, and hope. As the event concluded, a gentle, familiar rain began to fall. It wasn't the menacing deluge of the past. It was a soft, life-giving shower. Daniel pushed Elena's chair to the large, open awning. It's just a mist, he said, smiling. The memory of that terrifying downpour now just a faint shadow. He looked happier, the lines of grief around his eyes softened by a new shared purpose. We don't even need the umbrella. Elena leaned her head back, letting the fine mist touch her face. She closed her eyes, savoring the cool, clean feeling. You know, Daniel, I used to think the rain was a terrifying monster, a harbinger of disaster and being left alone. Now I only feel warm. It feels like cleansing. That's because you're not waiting for anyone anymore, he replied, his hand resting lightly and firmly on the back of her chair. You are the driver now. No, she agreed, opening her eyes, which were filled with a bright, undeniable future. She turned her head, looking up at him with immense tenderness. Now I'm only moving forward with someone. Us. Daniel smiled, a genuine, unfettered smile that reached his eyes. Suddenly, Lily, now a year older, raced up to them, holding a colorful balloon. Dad! Elena! Look! A double rainbow! I think Mom is smiling at the rain too today. It's the kindness magic. The profound silence that followed was not sad. It was a space of shared healing, where the woman Daniel had lost and the woman he had found finally coexisted in peace. Tears gathered in both their eyes, but they were tears of pure joy, mirroring the gentle mist falling around them. Daniel lowered himself, putting his arm around Elena and pulling Lily close to his side. They stood, a small, perfect circle, sheltered by the awning and united by fate. If you believe healing stories like this, stories of survival, purpose, and profound connection, deserve to be told, please share this narrative and subscribe to the channel. We tell the stories that should never be forgotten.